All right, welcome back, grade 10s. We are continuing our look at sustainability. And I do have to mention that I'm wrestling with two different midterms at the end of this related issue that we could see as early as next Thursday. One of them has 25 questions and the other has 40, I want to say. I'm leaning towards the 25 one because I think they're better questions. So if that's the case, I may end up giving you the 40 question one sooner than later as practice. Because we've done a lot of work practicing A1 this year. We've done some work practicing for A2. But I'd like to use the time we have left together, not every day, but as many days as we can practicing for multiple choice. So I do think I'm going to end up going with the smaller midterm, but that means that we'll have some practice questions that we can do together. So that's always good news. Yesterday we did a lot of research for our eventual end of term essay, an essay that I suggest to you that in the past we've simply given our students this prompt, and even if we don't give you this prompt, that prompt does summarize this course. That the course begins with a story of competition, zero-sum theory within that international relations. And it also really is defined with the Columbian Exchange, which because of it, mankind changed the world inadvertently, sometimes intentionally, and often brutally. And then that second sentence really summarizes the second half of the course, the idea that we have a very fragile planet, and that our future seems to be in the hands of cooperation. When we look at things like climate change, climate chaos, animal extinction, because of globalization, nations cannot be islands anymore. Yes, I know some nations are islands. Is Australia not an island? Well, it's also a continent, but I mean, you can't remain that isolated anymore. So I think that even if this isn't the prompt you see on your final exam, because technically I can't really show you the prompt in advance, I think this is one of the arguments that you will be making. Now you don't have to agree with that second part. You could say that because competition is natural, any attempts at cooperation will fail. You can certainly make that argument. I'm not here to indoctrinate. I'm here to facilitate the idea of looking at things from multiple angles. And I do think that the idea of competition being natural is a valid answer here that does deserve some attention. Speaking of attention, today we're going to continue with sustainability. If we were doing an A1, and we will be doing an A1 on the final exam, but we can definitely do an A1 in the second half of the course here. I think this is an A1 source that really captures much of what you looked at yesterday. Because of the names on the jerseys, it gives you a chance to look at many of those rabbit holes that we went down researching yesterday, including deforestation, including global warming, including animal or species extinction and pollution. Population is something we'll get to in the next lesson. So we'll look at overpopulation next week, if you're wondering. Because population is kind of the primary catalyst here. If we didn't have 8 billion people on the planet, we probably wouldn't have those other issues. So maybe to solve these other issues, the most difficult issue to look at is this one here. So we've done some research on deforestation and forestation, and on animal habitat destruction. Today we're going to be focused on climate change again, on the topic of waste, and we're going to do a mini unit on oil. And I'd actually like to get started with this mini unit on oil. Now, I do like this quote, "Oil is the lifeblood of the modern economy." I think that I have never heard a quote that so captures the significance of oil. Oil is the lifeblood of the modern economy. And anyone who believes that it isn't is a fool. an absolute fool. Oil is the lifeblood of the modern economy. And when we think of oil, we're not just talking about oil and natural gas as a source of energy. We're talking about oil as a building block. So often we'll hear from environmentalists, and I'm not here to say I'm not an environmentalist, or that I am an environmentalist, but we'll often hear from environmentalists saying that the world needs to kick its addiction of oil. The difficulty is many of the products that they use are built by oil. So the plastics depend upon oil. So oil is the lifeblood of the modern economy. And I think back to a protest, the Bridge Out protest in Edmonton just over a year ago today. And I don't know if you remember, but they blocked the Walterdale Bridge. And they had a canoe to symbolize the need of us to reconsider climate change because of global warming and the rising oceans. But on the canoe it also said we're all in this together. This idea that we need to work collectively on it. And they halted traffic. They blocked that bridge early in the morning, and it created a lot of frustration in commuters who now had their cars idling, which obviously is not great for the environment. But those protesting said it was important to inconvenience the people because it's an inconvenient inconvenience, right? To kind of borrow something from Al Gore, the idea that our actions, an externality of our daily lives, is causing climate change. But those who blocked the Walterdale Bridge, those who had that boat there, the canoe there to represent that we're all in this together, they got that canoe there by driving this big old suburban truck. So, hidden from the cameras was, hey, some of you rode bikes here, I get it. You're practicing what you'd like us to do. But others of you brought that boat here. How did you get it here? You got this big old suburban truck hiding down in the parking lot. That's really inefficient in terms of fuel. When asked about it, they said, well, we needed it. Well, that's everyone else's response too. I'm burning fossil fuels, not because it's a choice. Maybe I'd rather choose not to, but I don't have an alternative. Like you didn't have an alternative to get the boat there, I don't have an alternative either, and we need it. So as long as we're addicted to oil, as long as it's the lifeblood of the modern economy, we don't really have too many other options. Exploring some options now while we still have oil might be the logical thing to do. So today we're going to look at what is peak oil, when will we run out of oil. We want to describe the environmental impact of oil disasters. We want to look at David Suzuki and what he thinks about oil and ethical tar sands. I have my own opinions about David Suzuki. I'll try to keep everything as tight to my chest as possible. We'll look at the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and ultimately, I went and talked to some of my closest compadres, my allies, my friends, people I went to high school with and university with, and I said, hey, what do you guys think about oil? And I have their reflections here as well. We're actually going to start with that. And we're going to start with it because that's how we're going to end too. Because I'd like to add you to the list of individuals that are listed here. People that are stakeholders in the future of oil. So the end assignment here is I want you to come up with a position on oil. It doesn't have to be my position. It doesn't have to be in alignment with these, because you'll see that these positions are not in alignment with each other. But what I'd like you to do is today the assignment is to learn more about oil and then do a check-in with yourself and say, what do I think about oil? So that's our main assignment today. We don't do a lot of non-A1, A2 writing assignments. But this is a non-A1, A2 writing assignment. You're not writing an essay. As you can see by these learned friends of mine, you're only writing like a short paragraph. Similar to what I had my friends in China do with the century of humiliation. All right, so what inspired me to do this was a few years ago, it was reported that Alberta was considering expanding operations in the oil sands from their current, at that time, 4 major projects to over 20. So at that time, it was time in Alberta for Albertans to kind of pause and reflect and say, should we be expanding? Is it in our best interest? And I asked my good friends like Joey, who, yes, did inspire all the Joey references in class. So Joey Hutzel, I met at the University of Alberta. He's from, man, this is going on YouTube. He's from Drayton Valley. He was in a commerce program. He played baseball for Nebraska University. And Joey's that one friend that is always a little unpredictable. We'll say that. Joey grew up with the Pankowicz family, and one of the Pankowicz sons is playing hockey now. But Joey's friend from high school, Greg, is known as a coach after he was a player that famously didn't like a call on the ice. He fought a lot too. And decided to start throwing stuff at the ref. Greg was in pretty good shape so he could do that. And he eventually just took his clothes off and started throwing his clothes on the ice at the ref in protest of the call. Greg's coaching the team he used to play for, and he was going to start doing doctorate with the ref. He's just going to start throwing stuff on the ice. So this is often shown in those top 10 lists of coaches' meltdowns and stuff, because not too many coaches take care of letting their team get far. He pulled off his jacket. That's how frustrated I am. He raised his jacket. Not done there yet. Throwing water bottles. Next up, the shirts and not done there I am. So, Greg and Joey grew up together. They grew up in Drayton Valley. It's an oil town. It's a natural gas town. It's a natural resources town. And these are guys that if they have something to tell you, they tell you, right? So that's Joey. I can't believe all these people that want to shut down the oil sands. Let's be realistic. 500 ducks died. Ducks, not people, ducks. Who cares? They are ducks. The oil sands contribute 6% of our national GDP. I mentioned he had a degree in commerce, right? If we close them, our current national recession would worsen. Unemployment would rise, and governments would have even less resources to fund the social programs like welfare, healthcare, and education that all of you so opposed to oil sands development have grown to expect provided for you by the government. That was his clean version. So Joey says, let's not cut down the oil sands. He's saying, let's expand them. We need the jobs. We need the tax base. And 500 ducks died because, the externality of the process, who cares? I have some former students that kill 500 ducks every hunting season. And we know that because they take pictures of all the dead ducks that they've shot. Patrick Arnell. Patrick. So, Joey and Patrick were friends of mine at the same time, and they hated each other. Patrick was the first president of the U of A Environmental Conservation Sciences program. He has a degree from Oxford, a master's degree in urban planning. He is an environmentalist. He is definitely an environmentalist. Both of his parents were social workers. And he is very much plugged into, at least he says he's plugged into the environment. And I say that because Patrick would always be the one who'd leave his computer on the whole day, leave his window open in the middle of winter, and he had a huge footprint. But when he would talk to others, he would talk about how the environment is so precious. So Patrick, this is what Patrick says. There are two choices for Alberta. Either we'll be a rich province, which is a desert in the south, and a treeless, toxic swamp in the north, or we'll be an average province that has a sustainable ecosystem that supports life. Choice is clear. Standard of living or quality of life. Should we satisfy our endless consumer wants or address our actual environmental needs? We need to close the oil sands until we can process the oil without causing the nightmare, doomsday footprint. But we also need to park our SUVs and adopt more earth-friendly lifestyles. And as much ribbing that I was giving Patrick there, he did become more of an environmentalist. If you Google Patrick Arnell, he ran for the NDP in Calgary in a federal election. And famously, he when he ran for the NDP, he rode his bicycle around, and he also rode his bike across Canada. He's one of those guys that you never know where he's at, because he is a bit of a gypsy, right? He's somebody who's really loving life, and he understands because he's traveled the world. He's worked in Libya, he's worked in places other than Libya, like Spain, and he understands the beauty of the planet, and he's passionate about trying to protect that. So we have to definitely appreciate that part of Patrick's ideology, is that because he's traveled the world, because he's a photographer, and he really has seen the world at its most beautiful, he knows that there's something there that is in need of being protected. So that's Patrick. Next up, it's like roll of the dice. Who's next? Who's next? This is a little insight into me that maybe we should. Oh, Dave Bresler. So the Brez is a professor at the University of Alberta. I've mentioned him before when we talked about beer. I think I have his name spelled wrong there. I think it's S's. He's the one that was working on a beer that can help university students and others deal with diabetes. So there's the Brez. Dave, Patrick, and I, along with a guy named Wade that you'll see in a moment, were roommates in university. So Dr. Bresler now, he is on that cutting edge of creating new biotechnology to respond to some of the challenges that we have. Other than that, you might end up having him as a professor at the U of A if you go into certain programs, but he's mostly not working there now because he has government grants and stuff to do work elsewhere. So, the Brez. For me, the best reason to not shut down or even scale back the oil sands is that we need oil. We are more dependent on it than we realize. Sure, most people connect refined petrochemicals with heating their homes and driving their cars, but petrochemicals are also feedstock for just about everything under the sun, ranging from plastics to polyester. Rather than being dependent on a foreign source of oil, it is better to develop our reserves here. In the 1970s, OPEC punished the West for supporting Israel, and oil prices skyrocketed. The resulting stagflation destabilized the global economy. After 9/11, we also have to ask, if we import oil, who's profiting from the trade? And where's that profit being spent? A great number of oil exporting nations are home to abusive governments that oppress their own citizens and fund terrorists like Al-Qaeda. So he brings in the economics, he brings in the science. The whole idea that it is the feedstock for just about everything, the lifeblood of the modern day economy. I think Dave is offering some science and some economics and some international relations here. Dave, by the way, with Halloween season coming, Dave dressed as the mummy. I dressed as the vampire. Wade dressed as the Wolfman, and Patrick was a zombie, maybe? Anyways, Dave dressed as a mummy, and he used toilet paper to roll up his body, but he rolled it up too tight, and you know, it didn't look good, and it also wasn't healthy for his body. You know, it was really poor for his circulation and things like that. Nicole Toronis, a great friend of mine, we went to high school together, and she went to university at the same time I did. She went into nursing. She lives in northern Alberta in a place called Le Glace. In a place called Le Glace, with her family. And here we go. I'm afraid to live in Alberta. The provincial government has a manic determination to exploit its resources. It seems corrupt and blinded by greed, leaving the transnationals of the world to plunder our once pristine environment. Communities close to the oil sands are reporting high rates of rare diseases such as cancer of the bile duct. Fish from the rivers taste like gasoline, and the water in some areas is becoming so polluted that it can be set ablaze with a match. Sure, it creates jobs, like the poor suckers who get to rake the tailing ponds for carcasses of dead birds that totally stick to the water and cannot leave. But at what cost? So some of Nicole's friends live in Teepee Creek, which is on the other side of Sexsmith, and they have to boil their water because the water is brown. So definitely she knows firsthand some of the issues we're talking about. Well, this next one's long. Wade boards. So Wade's the other roommate. Wade lives in Hawaii now, and I hate him because of that. Why wouldn't I hate him because of that? Wade once was said to have one of the best 5 engineering jobs in the world. He had a job. Oh, I bet this is going to talk about it. He had a job where he got to fly around the world and parachute into places and listen for these little devices used to monitor whether or not the North Koreans are detonating nuclear weapons. So he set up little listening devices on islands throughout the Pacific Ocean, islands that nobody lives on, islands that he's just parachuting into. And once he's there, it doesn't take long for him to go and make sure the equipment's still working, and he'd have to do this regularly. So what would he do when he's done? He'd go kite surfing. So he just goes surfing some of the best areas in the world that most people aren't allowed to go to because they're military zones. So this is several years ago because he's old like me now, but he was working through the University of Hawaii, working for the US government, working for NATO. And I always say, you know, if I know somebody that's probably in the CIA, it's Wade Bortz. This guy is brilliant. He's created artificial bees, so little robotic bees, because he has bees, he has natural ones, but his natural ones weren't that smart, so he created little artificial ones to train his natural bees how to be better bees. The guy's brilliant. But sometimes you can have brilliant people, sorry Wade, but sometimes you can have brilliant people that maybe aren't that smart. So Wade also had a love of mountain biking in university, and we lived in East Campus in the Gardner Walk-Ups on 88 and 111. And so one day we got back and we're like, where's Wade? We haven't seen Wade in a couple of days. And you know, we realized Wade's been laying in bed for the last couple of days, and all we knew is that he had had a bicycle accident and that he had gone and went to lay down, and we kind of lost track of where Wade was, because you know we have classes once in a while and stuff too to attend to. So we look at his bike and we see that the seat was broken, and on the stem you can see what looks like extra lean hamburger beef. But what we realized, no, that's Wade. That's a little bit of Wade that's there. That's a little bit of the muscle and stuff of Wade's leg that is still attached to the stem because of the accident that he had going down the stairs in the river valley. That post went right into his leg. So we ended up going and checking on him, and sure enough, he had had blood poisoning, and he was probably dying. We had to carry the guy to the hospital. He may have died if we hadn't checked on him. So Brilliant guy, at the same time thinks he can just sleep it off. Oh, that's inconvenient. Oh, I'm going to take some Tylenol and go have a nap and this will be better. So sometimes the smartest people make the silliest decisions. And he definitely is, no doubt, the smartest person I've ever met. Expansion? Are you nuts? At present levels, the 4 projects that exist, we are already cannibalizing, and the language, right? We're cannibalizing our natural gas, 20% of what is used in all of Canada every year, and draining our rivers. It takes 2 to 6 barrels of water to produce 1 barrel of oil, to get the oil. We cannot drink oil, people. The Athabasca River is down 30% since 1970, and at present rates by 2020, maybe we should check in, it will be half of what it once was. Only 8% of the water used can be sufficiently cleaned. The rest is creating vast seas of dead water. Without the river, the boreal forest will die, and then buried toxins will spread even more contamination. If we add the 20 more projects proposed, we may as well nuke the province. Canada has lost all international credibility at meetings on the environment. This is funny. As long as we ignore our Kyoto obligations. Instead of cutting our greenhouse emissions by 6% compared to 1990 levels, we have actually increased by 24% relative to 1990 and continue to pillage our province. We're only adding to the global problems that plague mankind. And I say that's funny because that little comment about the environment, one of our friends ends up marrying a lady who was at times the environment minister in Canada here. But enough about her. Lisa Stettel. Lisa went to high school with me. She was the smartest person in our grad class. She went on to business, and I'm pretty sure that she invented cell phones or something amazing like that. No, she didn't do that, but I think she's into cryptocurrency now, but she was working for BlackBerry and Nortel, and definitely has carved an impressive swath through the business world. I put my faith in my government and capitalism. The governments of Alberta and Canada have entire teams of people monitoring the oil sands. They are not going to allow corporations to destroy the environment. That would be political suicide. Capitalism is also the key. If people are that opposed to our current addiction to oil, branch out. Use alternative sources of fuel. That brings me to my next point. I say expand. Let's sell it while it is still in demand. There are about 1.7 trillion barrels of heavy crude bitumen in proven reserves, and currently we are producing 1.3 million barrels a day. That's a lot of potential sales and an argument for expansion. The Chinese use the same word for crisis and opportunity. Capitalists have a history of being able to respond to and adapt to meet crises. Decades ago, London was gray due to the use of coal, so they changed. Someone will invent something like carbon capture and the storage of steam-assisted gravity drainage because there is a huge potential payday for the person who does. That is the beauty of capitalism. So all I'm asking you to do is write something like this, on the same level of insight as, 30-some-year-olds when they wrote it that had all this insight and training. Well, Kent's is a little shorter. Kent's a little shorter too. Oh my goodness, that was horrible. My mom used to call Kent the big little cowboy because he was like 5'6" and he thought he was like 6'4". He'd be always the one that would start fights but never would finish them because he'd go and hide in the closet. Sorry, Kent, but it is true. Kent wanted to be a dentist, and he might have been a great dentist. He definitely had the hands for it. You don't want a dentist with big hands. But Kent is currently in the Grand Prairie area, and I'll just leave it at that. But back in the day, he lived in Fort McMurray. I have great pride in my community, Fort McMurray. The oil sands are our backbone. The people here are passionate and hardworking. We offer hope in a time of despair. Any problems this community has are due to a shadow community of people who come here, make money, and leave within a year. The real Fort McMurray is more than that. So again, he didn't write a lot, but lengthwise, but I think there's a lot of insight there. So a lot of people look at the oil community and they see some shame because of the people within it. And he's saying, that's not our real town. That's not Fort McMurray. That's a shadow community of people who come to Alberta to basically get rich off of our resources. Abigail Harris, another roommate. I'm just gonna read it. I'm not gonna tell you too much about Abigail. Like other boom towns before, I think Fort McMurray, Fort Muck is out of control. If you call sex, drugs, violence, homelessness, big trucks, polluted air, and contaminated water out of control. The economy is booming so rapidly that it is unsustainable. The city has doubled in population in the past decade, leaving the area struggling to provide services and housing for the thousands of migrant workers that have flocked to the region, looking for the proverbial gold mine. This has meant that many stores cannot stay open due to labor shortages and housing costs have skyrocketed, illustrated by the fact that even a modest trailer now costs more than $300,000. It might be a surprise to you to learn that the city government has called for a moratorium on all new development until they can deal with the alarming influx of workers and the related shortages of services. So Abigail is saying, hey, we can't expand. We don't have the infrastructure. Interesting. This should say Marilyn Mellon, and in the years that I've had it, I never did that because that's too much work for me, I guess. Marilyn Mellon, a couple years older than us in high school, played volleyball at the U of A. Yeah. When people complain about the oil sands, they are often describing the open pit mining. This only accounts for 20% of the oil production, and for that reason, I think we could expand our in situ, I have no idea, extraction technologies and make the other 80% more profitable and ecologically sound. The provincial government should charge higher royalties, invest in research and development, and create a sustainable economic engine for the future generations to enjoy. Had the government did what Marilyn is saying 12 years ago, we wouldn't be having an economic problem today. So is it too late to listen to Marilyn? Maybe, but she definitely has some insight. We need to diversify. Tanya Bagalki. Tanya Bagalki was another roommate that wanted to be a doctor and instead moved to the Netherlands to be a nanny. She was the one that had incredible marks but could never, I'm divulging too much, never get past the the interview part of med school. Anyways. I remember when these projects began, the government and the corporations like Syncrude promised that they would reclaim the land that they were stripping. Well, they are and aren't reclaiming the land. You see, the land that once was a rich boreal forest and muskeg basin is turned into pasture for wood bison. This was not the original agreement. We cannot trust the government or the corporations. Shut down the developments until we have more independent investigation into the long-term impact of this development. Once again, I'm giving you the full spectrum here. So, no indoctrination in this class. So, left unfettered. Alberta's energy sector will, by the end of the century, transform the southern part of the province into a desert. I don't know what this is. Maybe I was just pulling some key stuff. So at the end of the day, I'd like you to maybe not create a letter, because I don't want you to have that little letter to the editor kind of stuff. Like, I don't want to see that format. I just want you to do what they did. Do a paragraph, tell me your response. Before we get into the next stage of this, I want you to take a moment and think about what you just had read to you and kind of collect your thoughts before we move on. So I'm going to give you about 60 seconds to collect your thoughts. Gives me a chance to get rid of this red wig because it's getting really warm up here, and then we'll move on. So 60 seconds, collect your thoughts. You should look at the notes that you just took because they give you some good ideas and see what you agree with. And if you didn't take notes, you might want to write down what are some lasting things that they said that you could build your argument around. Oh, wait. Right. It's really warm in here. Did you guys hear that they had to shut down that solar plant down by Medicine Hat or Lethbridge because it was costing more energy? It was a net it was a net user of energy than creator of energy. So they were using fossil fuels to run this solar-powered project farm. It cost millions of dollars in southern Alberta, but they still needed fossil fuels to run it, and they figured out, oh, we're actually losing energy every day, so they shut it down. So a lot of these wind farms are doing the same thing. They still have a net footprint on the environment. A lot of them are connected to diesel generators, and a lot of them are already having to be replaced because they're not immortal, right? So the products themselves break down, and then what do you do with the products? You put them in the landfill. So the ecological footprint of some of these alternative energies like solar or wind, it's not as minimal as you might think. Sometimes it's better to keep that 1970 GTO on the road than to buy a brand new Tesla, right? So we are going to get into the conversation now of what is peak oil. So what do you think peak oil is? What is peak oil? So you've probably heard the term peak, right, before? Like maybe peak intelligence or peak physical fitness. So I'm usually at my peak physical fitness come like February, March, because all summer I just eat ice cream like it's my job, because I like my ice cream. And then it takes a few months to get rid of that ice cream influence that you've had on your body kind of stuff. So peak, right? What's your peak, physical fitness? Like at your peak, what are you deadlifting? What are you squatting? What are you benching? What are you curling? How fast can you run how fast can you run 40 meters? Can you run a 440 or 40 yards? Can you run 40 yards in 4 seconds? What's your 100-meter time? How long's your mile? These are ways to measure, are you in peak performance? Well, what do you think the term peak oil means? So think about a peak, right? Think about a curve, like a bell curve. The peak is up at the top, and then we probably have less remaining than what we had in the first place. So peak is when we've used up more oil than what we have left. So if we had 100% of oil in the beginning, once you cross the peak, we have less than 50% left. So where do you guys think we're at? Have we used up more than half the oil? There's a lot of oil in the ground that may never get used because it's very difficult to get it out. So something for you to be thinking about. We're going to go back to 2005 and see what they thought about peak oil then. And we have to register to read this? Come on, people. No one wants to register. I'll do that later. So, as we look through the article on peak oil, they talk to industry specialists from the major companies like British Petroleum and Texaco and Shell and others, Exxon. They talk about how much oil we're using a day and how much oil we're mining a day or pulling from the ground. Indeed, almost every year for 150 years, the oil industry has been able to produce more oil than it did the year before. So one of the things that is confusing, to what degree are we at peak oil, is our continued ability to create more oil. So if we peaked, then how come we're creating more oil now than we did the year before? The estimates for OPEC countries were exaggerated in the late 1980s to win a greater slice of the allocation cake. So what they're talking about here is one of the difficulties saying, hey, this is the year we will reach or did reach peak oil, is that some countries are lying about how much oil they have. They're lying about how much oil because they're only allowed to sell a certain percentage of their oil reserves every year. So they might be lying and saying we've got more than we actually do so they can sell more. So the theory here is that perhaps we have a lot less oil in the world because countries like Iraq and Iran have been lying about how much they have so that they can sell more every year. If they're only allowed to sell 1% a year, then they might claim to have 3 times as much, so they can sell 3 times as much oil than they actually should be. Now, the United States was once the biggest exporter of oil in the world, leading up to about 1973. They go from being the biggest exporter to the biggest importer of oil. And as they transition from the biggest supplier to the biggest user of oil, their power on a global scale also transitioned. With oil comes power. Now the United States today is getting a lot of oil from, anybody know where? Where are they getting their oil? They're getting some from Alaska, but domestically, how are the United States creating more oil? Yes? They do buy from Saudi Arabia, but domestically, within the United States, how are they getting more oil? They're getting Texas oil. Yep, they're getting oil from the Gulf Coast. They're getting oil from Alaska, but they're also getting something called shale oil. Have you guys heard of shale oil before? So the United States has changed their dependence on oil on countries like Canada because they're extracting oil from shale. If they weren't doing this, then Alberta would not be in a recession right now, and our oil industry would be a lot stronger. But because the United States has become less addicted to our oil, because they have their own domestic sources of oil, they're still buying our oil because it's nice and cheap, but they're also getting a lot of oil from shale. So here's the thing that frustrates me as an Albertan. We have Americans like Leonardo DiCaprio that will come to Alberta, or like that singer. I had it twice in my mind. Sorry, what? No, he's a dude. And this is an American guy. Paul Young? Something Young? Something Young. Is it Paul Young? Singer. I don't think it's Paul. No, it's not Paul. Anyways, he came and he toured the oil sands, and he wrote this scathing report of how Alberta was committing a an environmental genocide. That Alberta was like, we were basically the most criminal people on the planet for what we're doing. And at the same time we're doing that, look at your own shale industry. There's an ecological footprint for that. So it's often easier for Hollywood celebrities to look at others with criticism but not look at themselves. So yes, the oil sands does have an ecological footprint attached to it. So does shale oil. But it's not popular for them to question their own corporations, so they come to Alberta and question ours.
Are you possibly thinking of
Neil Young, yeah, there we go. And you had it like just seconds before me right there. Neil Young's anti-oil sands comments draw fire from the industry. And Neil Young being in that entertainment industry, you're telling me Hollywood doesn't have a huge ecological footprint? You're telling me movies are created in an ecologically sustainable way? Please, Neil Young, please. Show some common sense. And then we also have the director of Titanic and the director of what's that movie when they're like purple skinned? They live on that other planet? Yeah, Avatar. Who directed that?
They're blue.
James Cameron. Are they blue?
Yes, they're blue.
Maybe I'm green, blue colorblind. You just called me out like that. So James Cameron has also gone on record saying Albertans are horrible people. So, how do we go here from peak oil? Oh, because we're talking about how once the United States was the biggest exporter of oil, and now they're not. But they have, through shale oil, they have created their own reserves, but there's a huge ecological footprint. So let's just ask Google to speed this up. When is peak oil? Yeah. And can you guys do a drum roll? Because this is drum roll worthy. Looks like it already happened. Looks like it already happened. Sometime between 2015 and 2030, so maybe it hasn't happened. Some people think it has happened before 2020. The key is, once again, countries like Iraq and Iran have maybe lied to us about when we have, how much oil they have. The theory is we have about 53 years left of oil. So, how old are you guys? I guess you don't really have to worry about it. Yeah, or at least in a point where this will be a legacy of suffering that you'll hand on to your children and your grandchildren. So 53 years from now, yeah, what am I worried about? Man, let's just watch videos.
Yes.
Yeah, oil, who cares? So when will we run out of oil? Again, you're gonna see lots of different things, and oh look, the UCP doesn't want us to know about that, so it's forbidden. Describe the environmental impact of oil disasters. Another way to look at this industry is to look at some of the disasters that have been created by it. So I would say that maybe the most famous one, which I'm not seeing a list here, is the Exxon Valdez oil spill. Exxon Valdez, have you guys heard of that?
Yeah.
So Valdez is a place in Alaska. Exxon is like Esso. Exxon is their parent company, so it may be the biggest oil company in the world, or one of the biggest. And they had a tanker, and the captain was drinking and driving a boat. Do you drive a boat? Pilot a boat? Steer a boat? Captain a boat? Command a boat? Sail a boat? Yeah, we'll say sailing. Drinking and sailing. And that's not a good combination. And therefore, they ended up spilling oil. How much oil? It was then the largest oil spill, so we've done worse since then. How much oil? Well, it says right here that 2,100 kilometers of shore was impacted, and that's the volume of oil. 10.82 times 10 to the power of the 6 US gallons. Seems like a lot of oil. So you've got human error that causes an oil spill, and if we go images, you're just going to see lots of birds with oil all covered in them that can't fly, right? These are going to be horrible pictures. Whales that are beached, fires. So due to human error, transporting oil across the water is not the best thing. Too bad there wasn't like a pipeline that we could just do this underground and be safer, right? So sometimes pipelines underground also burst. So there was one that had an issue in the Gulf of Mexico. The Gulf of Mexico pipeline, Gulf of Mexico oil spill. Well, that was easy. So sometimes you got oil spills that happen underneath the water, and once again, you start contaminating the ecosystem. When birds are covered in oil, they can't fly. When fish are covered in oil, they also die. And I remember that this took, how long did it take them to clean that up? Let's see. You guys should remember this. You're like, what, 6, 4, 5? It's in the middle. You guys should remember this. So, long-term effects, look how long it took. It took from April to September. Now that doesn't seem that long because we've been battling COVID for longer than that, but again, you got 4.9 million barrels being lost. Long-term effects of the British Petroleum oil spill, exposed cleanup workers. These seem fairly reasonable consequences, but it's more to the local ecosystem, right? 10 years later, oil spill still continues to harm the wildlife in the area. So when people look at our addiction to oil and they're like, well, is this sound policy? They're saying, well, 10 years after the 2010 spill, we're still seeing an impact of that British Petroleum oil spill on the animals, the wildlife of the Gulf of Mexico. So, continuing on. Now, who's David Suzuki? David Suzuki is an environmentalist. So what do you think he's going to think about tar sands? He's going to not like them, right? Now, David Suzuki, by the way, is also what I would call a hypocrite. Anybody know what a hypocrite is? What am I, drunk? I'm falling out of my desk. What's a hypocrite? Well, David Suzuki house. Oh, he's got 5 houses. That seems excessive right there. I was hoping that they'd show his house on Vancouver Island. I didn't realize he had 5 houses. David Suzuki house. Anyways, he had to have a lot of those old growth trees, those 1,200-year-old trees cleared so he could build a house on Vancouver Island. So you say you're an environmentalist and you're cutting down old growth rainforest so that you can build your own house. That makes you a hypocrite and takes away a lot of your credibility. David Suzuki, if that's your name. So David Suzuki, trees. Let's see if it comes up. 'Cause I feel like it sounds like I'm just making up stories now. Maybe I am.
He wrote a book about trees.
Yeah, about cutting them down to build his house. He's like President Lincoln, right? Didn't he cut down a cherry tree with his bare hands and make some dentures out of them and build a log house?
That was Washington.
Man, you're just. No, I think that was Denzel Washington. Wasn't that in that movie? Training Day? Anyways, just maybe take my word for it that he's a hypocrite, even though the internet says nothing about it. David Suzuki, hypocrite. I don't even know how to spell hypocrite.
Hypho.
Yes, David Suzuki, you are what you do. Wow, David Suzuki dropped the F-bomb. Well, that's okay.
That was on the other stuff too.
So he's got a massive carbon footprint, but don't we all? But I'm sure that he had some old growth rainforest trees cut down for one of his houses.
You could always search where that house is.
Was it a good house?
It was a beautiful house. It was totally worth it. You know, those owls that used to live in his trees that have nowhere to live now and they're just basically dead, those endangered spotted owls. Maybe we don't need owls anyways, right? But what does he think about the tar sands? Oh yeah, that's what we're doing here. Worst teacher. Oh, look at that. We're not allowed to see it anymore. He's hiding stuff. Oh, you gotta donate to learn your stuff. Mr. David Suzuki, one of the most honored Canadians in history. Well, I'm just gonna move on then. Trans Mountain Pipeline. Well, I think you're pretty familiar with what that is, the Trans Mountain Pipeline. It's the idea that, well, oil from Alberta needs to get to port so we can sell it. If we can only sell to the Americans, then they're not gonna pay us world price. So what we want to do is ship Canada's oil, Alberta's oil, your oil, through British Columbia because we don't have a shore, so we can sell it to countries like India and China that will pay us more money. But it was controversial because in British Columbia, it would have to pass through, someone else's territory, BC's territory. And a lot of the indigenous people that live in BC, they wanted to see it not go through their land because they're worried about it potentially spilling and contaminating their land, or they want a part of the action. They're like, well, what's in it for us? How much money are you going to give us to export your oil through our land? So British Columbia and Alberta are meant to be a part of a family, but the Trans Mountain Pipeline started creating some of those, why are we in Canada moments for Albertans? The Trans-Canada Highway goes through Alberta, and we don't charge a toll for British Columbia's products to go through there, but we need a highway to the ocean so we can get our resources to the world, and our other provinces aren't playing nicely with us. We can't ship it west, we can't ship it east. So what ended up happening, you probably know, the Trudeau government ended up buying the pipeline and probably overpaying for it, bought it from American interests, and still the pipeline's not built. The pipeline is in the act of being built, but until it's built, it's not really benefiting us. Another part of the action is this idea that oil is directly connected to climate change. Another thing to consider is this source, and I'm going to give you 2 minutes to look at the source, and you're going to tell me the ideological perspective. So this is a nice little chart, nice little graph, and the quote that goes with it. I want you to tell me the ideological perspective. Alright, so we have 4 things happening here. We have the Human Development Index up one side, we have oil use down the other side, we have this quote, and then we have these countries labeled. So, we have countries like the United States, that use the most oil. We have other countries like Japan and Germany that use a lot of oil. Then we have countries like Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Vietnam that use very little oil. Human Development Index, you're wanting to be higher up here. The higher you are, the more developed, the more modern, and to some extent, the higher standard of living, quality of life your people have. You could make the argument that we want to be further this way. We don't want to be like the United States using so much oil to sustain our lifestyle. So theoretically, would the whole world be happy if we had the same lives as the Chinese or the Brazilians? Would Americans cut their oil use in third by only going down by like 20% in the HDI? But the quote is, as the world's primary source of energy, the lifeblood of the modern economy, right? The most developed nations depend on more and more oil. So the fear is that these countries want to be over here. And they see the path to go from here to here by using more oil. So if you have a country like Nigeria that has oil and natural gas, then how can countries like the United States with any credibility say to them, well, you know what, it's not good for the environment. Can we get you not to use oil and natural gas? Nigeria, your population's exploded. You have 200 million people. Soon you'll have 300 million people. We can't afford another country of that size to become so dependent on oil. Can you just maybe not use it to the same extent that the Americans, the Canadians, the Japanese, and Germans do? There seems to be a Western or Northern bias that we get to use it, but you don't. Ideological perspective of this is that Jason Kenney is going to joust with the alternative energy, that he doesn't support it, that he's going to attack it, that he's going to destroy it. So like a knight on a horse, his foe, his enemy is alternative energy. He's invested heavily taxpayer dollars into oil and natural gas, and we'll see how that works out. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to get you to do a little bit of reading on oil in the textbook, and then we are going to have our mask break. When we get back from the mask break, we should have some Chromebooks back in here, and I'm going to get you to do that paragraph for me. So let's check to see what's in the textbook first.